This company ran its own army, built hundreds of ships, and made $8 trillion in today's money, almost double Microsoft, Apple, and Google's combined value. They forced nearly 1 million workers across Asia, traded more goods than any other, and shaped the world's first stock market. Today, you'll finally see how the $8 trillion company ended up owning everything. The forgotten company richer than every empire combined. History rarely offered a tale so packed with numbers that modern banks looked small by comparison. The story began in a damp, bustling canal city of the 17th century, where shadows fell across narrow lanes and fortunes took shape in quiet counting houses. Back in 1580, Spain and Portugal united under the Iberian Union. Their empires became a single global colossus, stretching from Brazil's jungles to the harbors of Goa and Macau. For Dutch rebels, locked in their struggle for freedom from Spain, the news meant facing the largest empire on Earth, with their own lands technically still inside it. Firearms alone could never match that juggernaut. Dutch leaders, needing a way to survive, reached for private money instead of fresh armies. In 1602, a document signed in The Hague unleashed something the world had never seen: the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the United East India Company, or VOC. On paper, it looked like a trading business. In reality, it received powers usually held by kings. The VOC could wage war, sign peace, build forts, enforce laws, and mint its own coins across Asia, holding a 21-year monopoly over Dutch trade east of Africa. Holland, hungry for independence, handed the empire to a spreadsheet. The scale of VOC operations still continued to amaze economists centuries later. Between 1602 and 1796, the VOC dispatched nearly 1 million people to Asia across 4,785 voyages, moving about 2.5 million tons of goods and enslaved people. No rival came close. The English East India Company shifted just a fifth of that in the same era. By its mid-1600s peak, the VOC's global workforce touched 50,000. The ultimate shock came in the numbers. Historians estimated the VOC's market value at 78 million Dutch guilders, equal to around $8 trillion today, rivaling the GDP of giant economies. Dutch rebels, facing imperial Spain, had forged the world's first multinational, wielding paperwork and capital as weapons. What happened next revealed how signatures on documents changed world history, one ledger at a time. How merchants turned paperwork into a global weapon. At first, VOC power arrived with sails and cannons. Yet hidden beneath gun decks and chests of silver, the real weapons had always been contracts and account books. Every empire grew by force, but the VOC grew faster through paper. Amsterdam's directors knew paperwork moved money and men farther than muskets could. Each East Indiaman, a hybrid of cargo ship and warship, left Dutch ports bristling with guns and loaded with ledgers. On board, captains clutched treaties, legal instructions, and signed agreements alongside their navigation charts. When the VOC landed in places like the Banda Islands, paperwork set the rules. Jan Pieterszoon Cohen's campaign, from 1609 to 1621, showed how quickly legal claims could turn deadly. Out of an estimated 15,000 Bandanese, only about 1,000 survived as the rest died, fled, or were enslaved. Dutch planters and forced labor took over, guarded by VOC posts. In Ambon, paper again authorized brutality. In 1623, after charges of a plot to seize Fort Victoria, VOC officials interrogated and executed 21 men, fueling the infamous Amboina massacre. The Dutch eliminated English, Japanese, and Portuguese rivals and secured spice monopolies with ink and fear. Back in Europe, VOC leaders acted as cold-eyed investors. The board, known as the Heren 17, met in Amsterdam to send fleets, allocate cash, and distribute dividends. By the company's height, VOC roughly managed 150 merchant ships, dozens of warships, and its own private army, sometimes quoted at nearly 10,000 soldiers, a force larger than many states. Each sack of pepper or bolt of silk became another number in an account book. Shareholders watched the returns closely, with annual dividends sometimes hitting 18% for decades. The VOC's paperwork turned violence in Asia into profit in Amsterdam. Every successful voyage meant more power for investors. As this system matured, an unexpected new partner stepped forward: one who wore royal colors but never a traditional crown, steering the next chapter of the corporate empire. The royal family that ruled the world without crowns. In an era of kings and queens, the House of Orange Nassau achieved lasting power with no throne in sight. This family's name still lingered in city squares, yet their true legacy came from a world of charters, shares, and global influence that few monarchs matched. William the Silent led the Dutch revolt against Spain before dying in 1584. But his family line kept control of the stadtholder title, a military and executive post scattered across Dutch provinces. The Orange family wielded influence, yet merchant elites ran the new republic. So the Oranges turned to capital instead of crowns. By investing in trading companies and state bonds, they tied their fortunes directly to commercial success. As the VOC and its Atlantic sibling, the Dutch West India Company, expanded, the Oranges gained more than just dividends. They found themselves at the heart of a new power structure. By the 18th century, historians documented how stadtholders William IV and William V both served as company presidents, mixing political leadership with direct corporate command. This arrangement gave the family leverage over colonial appointments, capital flows, and military strategy, all without the burden of traditional monarchy. The Oranges embraced this identity. Instead of ruling peasants, they received dividends and salaries from global trading companies. Every VOC ship that sailed for Batavia or Ceylon did so under charters carrying royal ambition. This system of indirect rule made the Oranges richer and more influential than most crowned heads in Europe. Eventually, the Orange Dynasty's unique blend of financial and political power jumped borders. When a descendant crossed the North Sea, this commercial approach helped change England's destiny, setting up the next act in the story of global capital. The stock market that accidentally invented modern power. Markets rarely rewrite history overnight, but Amsterdam's invention in the early 1600s did just that. For the first time, a war company like the VOC opened ownership to everyday citizens. Suddenly, anyone with cash could buy a piece of a global empire. In March 1602, the VOC charter invited all local residents to subscribe capital for shares. Over 1,100 investors in Amsterdam signed up, together pledging nearly 3.7 million guilders, an amount far exceeding 100 million euros today. What really changed everything hid in the details. Shares no longer dissolved after each voyage, and they could be traded freely. This created a continuous secondary market for VOC stock, first inside the East India House, then on the newly built Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Dam Square quickly filled with brokers. Traders negotiated VOC shares and bonds in a narrow one-hour window, then spilled into coffee houses and private clubs to keep the deals flowing. VOC paper, backed by global spice monopolies, became the hottest asset in Europe. Speculators wasted no time. Early forms of options, short sales, and forward contracts appeared. In 1688, Joseph de la Vega wrote Confusion de Confusiones, describing trading tactics still familiar to anyone following markets centuries later. The legal breakthrough that sealed the deal was limited liability. Investors who lost their stakes in bad voyages faced ruin, but creditors could never touch their houses or tools. This encouraged the rise of a Dutch middle-class investor culture and protected family fortunes from corporate risk. VOC share prices soared. The stock index rose tenfold between 1600 and the bubble years of the 1720s. Missing out felt like missing a life-changing lottery, and new fortunes chased every opportunity. This culture of finance and speculation did not stop in Amsterdam. When a member of the Orange family reached England, those same tools rewired the financial heart of another empire. How a Dutch trade post became Wall Street's DNA. Sometimes the smallest decisions cast the longest shadows. The Dutch not only planted their financial system in Europe, but across the Atlantic they also left seeds that would later blossom into Wall Street's DNA. In 1688, England's political crisis brought William III of Orange to London. Raised among the joint stock markets and tolerant merchant culture of the Dutch Republic, William brought those habits straight to the English throne. While James II escaped into exile, William and Mary reformed England's financial core, confronting mounting war expenses with Dutch techniques. The English Parliament and the new king floated long-term bonds, and by 1694, the Bank of England opened its doors as a joint stock company, lending directly to the government. By 1702, England's public debt already exceeded £14 million, but the system behind it kept payments regular and credit reliable. This transformation, often called the Financial Revolution, fused state power with capital markets. It allowed England to outpace rivals and build a navy strong enough to rule the world for over a century. These techniques mirrored Amsterdam's: bonds, chartered banks, and public securities, all thriving in a new culture of market participation. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Dutch West India Company built New Amsterdam at the tip of Manhattan in 1624. Streets there grew around warehouses and docks, shaped by tolerance for multiple religions and nationalities, a habit born out of trade rather than idealism. Even after the English took control in 1664, renaming the city New York, they kept those commercial structures. Merchant habits, contract law, and credit systems from the Dutch period blended with English rules, and the lower tip of Manhattan evolved into a finance center. Generations later, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street, and global banking all grew atop foundations laid by Dutch chartered companies and their culture of risk and reward. Yet, as all this unfolded, the original VOC empire slowly crumbled, leaving its playbook behind, even as the ships vanished from the seas. The empire that collapsed, but never really disappeared. From the outside, the VOC seemed unbreakable, yet up close, cracks spread through the company's books and outposts. Competition from Britain and France, rising military costs, and unchecked corruption eroded the empire's profits and discipline by the mid-17th century. Greed, not governance, drove many VOC officials. Some treated colonial posts as private cash machines, draining local wealth and ignoring orders from Amsterdam. Markets around the world grew less forgiving of rigid monopolies and slow managers. In Batavia in 1740, one of the bloodiest chapters unfolded when company authorities and allies killed around 10,000 ethnic Chinese residents, cementing a pattern of violence and forced labor lasted until the company's end. Financial rot followed. The Dutch state stepped in during the 1790s, taking control of VOC property. By the close of 1799, the original company disappeared as a legal entity. Its buildings, trade routes, and financial habits survived, even as the brand faded into memory. The Netherlands shifted from a seaborne empire to a financial superconnector. By the 21st century, Dutch institutions, companies, and households managed about 3.5 trillion euros in securities, nearly triple the nation's GDP. Reports place Dutch outward investments at around 4.8 trillion euros, with inward sums reaching 3.8 trillion euros, making the Netherlands one of the world's most connected financial hubs. The House of Orange still graced the nation's ceremonial leadership. Parts of the royal fortune remain deeply linked with Dutch corporate giants. Royal Dutch Shell, born from a 1907 merger to rival Standard Oil, stood for decades as a flagship of Dutch financial power. Through all these transformations, Dutch companies exploited favorable legal frameworks, global networks, and modern capital markets to channel wealth from every continent. The VOC's ships no longer sailed, but the logic that built them, joint stock companies, limited liability, speculative markets, and the blend of state and private power, lived on. The Dutch capital traveled through digital wires and international treaties, reaching farther than even the most ambitious VOC director could have ever dreamed, proving that some empires never truly faded, they simply changed shape. The biggest secrets in business are usually right in front of us. If you would like to watch stories like this, subscribe to Dollar Bill Secrets. What you've just seen is a small part of a much bigger picture.